Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, also the host here for the podcast. And welcome and thank you for joining us today. You may notice I'm in a different place today. I'm actually traveling. I'm traveling for a conference, an event tomorrow. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. I have to think about that. I'm wondering, what state I'm in. I'm on the Missouri side, and I'm here for an event actually tomorrow. So excited to be here. We've got a great show for you. And before we get started, if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was formed, I guess, about 6 years ago now, a little over 6 years ago. We are on a mission related to reducing and eliminating punitive discipline, exclusionary discipline, outdated behavior management, really trying to reduce the use of restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, all the things that are often done to children in the name of discipline. We do a lot of work in that vein, from conferences and events to our podcast to a lot of articles and other things that we do, and invite you, if you're not already familiar with who we are and what we do, to check out our website at endseclusion.org. I'm excited to have a return guest here with us today. I've got Nicole Keler, who will be joining us here in just a moment. We'll be talking a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how these things are still very important in education. And as you may know, there's been a lot of discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion in this current year, and a lot of misunderstanding as well. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And before I introduce Nicole, I just want to mention that really appreciate all of you that join us week after week. It's always a pleasure to see kind of the names that pop up in the comments and people that join us, and really appreciate that. And also appreciate the support of so many of you that support our work. Want to encourage you as well. One of the options that we started this year, we're a very, very small nonprofit, and we're a small nonprofit that tries to have a big impact, but that takes resources. And one of the ways that we get those resources is through donations and support. We have a membership option now, which allows people to become members of the Alliance, and you can do so for as little as $5 a month, and that contributes to the work that we do and helps us to do the things that we're trying to do to really make a difference and try to push things in a better direction. So just wanted to mention that real quickly. And I know Courtney is right on time with a link there in the chat. If you are watching live, and I know a few of you are already on live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always a lot of fun to see where people are joining us from. I know we have people that often join us from all across the world. So it's a lot of fun to see who's on and sometimes what time it is. We know, from doing this long enough that when we're doing this in the afternoon, it's very early on the other side of the world. So let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And with that, let me go ahead and introduce to you our special guest that we have here with us today. And I'm going to have Nicole jump on stage here with me. And hey, Nicole, I'm going to read through your intro here real quick. So give me a quick second here just to kind of give a little bit about your background. Nicole Keler is a passionate special education leader with 9 years of experience working in the public charter school system across Washington, D.C. She is currently a specialist on the school equity and effectiveness team at D.C. Public Charter School Board. However, she started in the education system as a special education teacher, then transitioned to working as an inclusion manager to support families and students with diverse learning needs on a larger scale. She believes that homeschool partnerships are the key to successful student outcomes. Of course, rooted in trauma-informed practices such as Flamboyan and Conscious Discipline, Nicole works tirelessly to engage families throughout the special education process and has created systems to ensure team collaboration during Tier 1, 2, and 3 processes. Her experience inspired her to establish LiveWellEd with co-founder Angie Zara to bridge the school and family best practices. And of course, any of you that have watched before, you may have even seen Angie and Nicole with us together. And Angie as well has presented here separately and been on here a couple of times. So Nicole, welcome, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for that awesome introduction.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to have you here. And of course, you and I actually connected, I guess, originally through Angie, and had a chance actually to speak in person a little bit, even though we're not terribly far apart. We haven't met in person, around here, but we've had a chance to meet in person recently in an event. and appreciate the work that you do. And, I know that you and Angie have been partnering up to do some amazing things as well. And of course, we're going to be talking a little bit today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why this is something that's really important in education. Of course, been interesting times, and there's a lot of things happening in the world. One has been, though, kind of this, oh gosh, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than to say the kind of misrepresentation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and what it means, and why it's important. So I think it's an important conversation to have, as these are really critical parts of education systems. So before we dive into that, though, I wonder if you might walk us through a little bit more about, shared in your bio, you kind of started off as a special education teacher, but share a little bit more about your journey with us, kind of how you got started in this, kind of what led you to education. So if you would, tell us a little bit more about your journey.
Sure. I might go a little bit backwards here, starting with like how.
You like.
Thanks, Guy. I mean, we were first connected, I think, on the premise of building inclusive schools, right? And so it's interesting how we have connected at various conferences and through Angie, through the trauma-informed teaching lens, which I think is really like intercepted with this work. And I'm excited to be here today to talk about the passion of building inclusive schools and inclusive classrooms. And so I have always been passionate about creating equitable school systems, providing access to all students since early in like my college career. And so from that, got my degree in elementary and special education teaching through a program that was formerly called Urban Teachers. And so I've always been based in DC in the classrooms. And so I've been exposed to seeing a lot of need for changing the mindset of educators, and with all of the research that we now have access to of how general education students and all neurodivergent students too can benefit from a more inclusive school environment. And so how Angie and I were here last time talking about how we can create systems within schools to be able to help school leaders and teachers communicate better and build more proficient systems in order to really foster inclusive environments, and eventually hope to shift that mindset. So I'm really here today to talk with you about helping create that change in the school systems. And I'm really inspired by all of the work that the Alliance does. It's really, really important getting schools and school systems. I know you do a lot of work with districts as well too, resources on how to create this systemic change.
And you're really kind of a systems change person. I mean, you started out as a special educator, but the work that you've been doing more recently has been more in that area of, how do we change systems? How do we adapt? And I will mention real quickly here that look who's joining us here. We've got Angie here, and looking forward to hearing your insight. We've got Amanda here from New York. I saw somebody else here, Paula in Atlanta. So a couple of people have joined on here. Anybody else that's joined on, feel free in the chat. Let us know who you are and where you're from. It's always fun to kind of see where people are joining us from. Often we have people from around the world. So we see people from New Zealand and Australia, and so many. This work's interesting because there's so many people on like-minded journeys trying to do some of this work, and some of these things that are really critical to seeing kids succeed. Just kind of backing up in your story a little bit, I'm just kind of curious, and there could be lots of reasons, but I'm curious if there was anything in particular that kind of led you down the road to education in the first place, and special education at that.
Yeah. To be honest, it was a little bit of like a personal journey, like reflecting on my youth, and that learning didn't always come the easiest for me. And I definitely learned best from the teachers that were open-minded to teaching in different avenues, which when I was growing up, there was one way to learn it. And there were some teachers that were really focused on just teaching students in one manner. And if you didn't learn it or show your work in that one way, then you weren't going to proceed. And I had to study really hard. And I learned from the teachers that were open. Some of us have those like one or two teachers that we can think of, right, that were really successful in helping meet students like where they were at through that journey. And I've also just learning throughout my college career. Shout out to Rochester. I went to Syracuse, which is not too far away from there. Um, the disproportionality within access to high quality education. And it is my firm belief that it is a right that all people should have access to. I spent some time in South Africa working in the township schools there with students in after school programs. And I was really inspired by the students that had such little access, their desire and hunger for learning. And it wasn't like, I haven't been in all classrooms in America that the teachers had such passion and the students had such passion. Why can't we bring that here? What's going on? And so I really wanted to investigate further. And it is, as we know, a really huge systemic issue that is related to trauma, right? And generational trauma that we have here. And so there's so many layers to it, but I'm really interested in, education. And then when I was in the classroom, I really got connected to my students that had different learning needs and different learning styles, and getting to know those parents and seeing how much the impact that you have when you get to know those families, when you get to know those students and you make them feel successful, right? Because that doesn't always happen in people's careers. And so I felt really connected to education through that process, building families up and building the students.
It's really interesting because, you kind of shared how, the one size fits all school experience, which is still very, very prevalent. There's a lot of effort around trying to get all kids to comply and fit into a system that's not well designed for them. And it's interesting that you had that experience as well, kind of feeling like the system was not necessarily well designed for you. And of course, I've had that experience on a couple of levels as well, not only, kind of probably as a student, but also, with my own children, kind of going through a system that's not been well designed for them. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think I found that increasingly, I find that there's a lot of people that are on this journey that are doing this work, whether, in a capacity like yours, working in a school, whether it's advocating, whether, it's a parent. And so often, many of them have a lot in common in their journey. And of course, we have a lot of families that we work with who, have children that are neurodivergent in various ways. And, often, have parents as well that kind of find out along the way, like, oh, guess what, I am as well. And this makes a lot of sense now. But, there has been for a long time a need to better support a greater diversity of brains and minds and, how people learn. And there's some really great answers to all of that out there as well. And we'll get into that hopefully in a few minutes. But, it is interesting that you kind of, related to that journey yourself. And I find that a lot of people that I've connected with in this work have had similar stories. And you mentioned kind of like the positive experience, with an educator. And, I also find that a lot of the people that I've collaborated with have both a positive experience, but also some of those negative experiences. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, because what instantly comes to mind in that moment is like, let me think about this. Who was a really positive? Who was a teacher that was really positive? And then the flip side of that was thinking about a teacher that wasn't. And she's probably no longer teaching, but I think about my first grade teacher, whose name was Mrs. Green. I used to call her Mrs. Mean. She was not very nice. Hopefully she's not out there watching. But, I mean, the relationships are so critical. I mean, that's something we talk about a lot. And, especially as we dive into kind of connecting and the importance of regulation and co-regulation. So it's interesting you share that. Kind of on your positive side of the story, I won't put you on the spot for kind of a equivalent to Mrs. Mean, but do you have a teacher that you think about that really was transformative for you as you were, kind of going through school, and you expressed that sometimes finding that it didn't work well for you? Did you have somebody along the way that made you feel kind of more seen and heard and valued?
Yeah, definitely. I'll always remember my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Hennigan, if she is listening. um, really welcomed all ideas, and there was no question that was a stupid question, and she really made, I feel like, her students internalize that, and if you needed the extra help, didn't shame any student for asking for extra help. And I think having that open mindset and sense of belonging, which I think might be like a theme throughout our conversations of inclusion, that was that the sense that I felt welcomed in her classroom and I was able to really learn.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, I also have the teachers that I did not have a great experience with. The
Right.
one size fits all really captures that essence.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting about it is I, kind of I'm doing some more reflecting as we're talking, and thinking about some of the teachers that really connected with me along the way, and how there was a direct correlation between that connection and how interesting and exciting it was to learn, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I remember teachers that I had for subjects that I thought weren't very exciting that suddenly taught them in a way and connected with me in a way that I felt like it was something important and part of me. And it's so important kind of what that can do in terms of kind of how you reflect. I want to pause for a second, just a couple more hellos that we had. Michelle from Nebraska. We've got Jelly here from Iowa, former special education educator in special programs. Got Lindsay here from Ohio. Well, we've got an active chat here. Let's see, Shelley shared, I've observed a lack of investment in training educators and in investments within the systems for appropriate class sizes and programming. Um, yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and I'm sure we can get on some of those as well as we talk about this. Lindsay shared, my kindergarten teacher tied me to a chair. Yeah, and sadly, I mean, these things have a tremendous amount of impact, and you'd like to think that these kind of things don't happen anymore, but they do. I mean, that's part of the reason we exist. Is we hear stories all the time about kids being taped to chairs, and I went to school at a time that. I attended when I was very young, attended a private school and was subjected to corporal punishment when I was 6 and 7 years old. And unfortunately, these are things that we should know better today, but they still happen, and absolutely can lead to a lot of harm. Shelley just said, Lindsay, that wasn't okay. Absolutely not. Yeah, and the fact that these things continue to happen just really is upsetting. So anyway, thank you everybody that's weighing in on the chat. It's always great to see. And Michelle, absolutely, my feeling on compliance, my least favorite word. We absolutely need to shift. So let's get into kind of the heart of some of our conversation here. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because of the work that you've done to, support, diverse students, and to really think about and focus heavily on important concepts like inclusion and what that means, and what is meaningful inclusion, because you and I both have seen probably examples of people checking the box with what they think inclusion is, and really missing the mark, and not doing well. But given the environment that we're in today, given the world that we're in today, I wonder if I could get you just to take a further step back and talk a little bit at a high level about diversity, equity, inclusion, even accessibility, if you'd like to, but kind of those as principles and why they're really important in terms of education.
Totally. I think you really hit the mark there, Guy, with talking about how there's like some of these surface level aspects, even when we're thinking about how schools need to like change their mission, things like that. But what does meaningful inclusion look like? I love to say that it starts with the mindset. So when we think about the mindset and the approach of the school, from their leaders to their educators to their para educators, it is really a culture that needs to be existing. And how can you build that? Well, starting by emphasizing relationship building with all students and the language that you talk about students and then talk to students is so important.
Oh, yeah, that language piece is really important. Um, the idea that the words that we use can affect our thoughts, and our thoughts can then affect the words that we use, and those words can affect how other people see themselves, and that can then affect their actions. You actually begin to create this loop, and words are really important to me in a lot of ways, because I hear kids sometimes described in ways that are really harmful. For instance, when we talk about things like restraint seclusion, we will find people say, well, the child was violent, this violent child. And the word violence always, concerns me, because violence assumes intent. Often what you have in a situation where you have a child that might have a big behavior, and nobody's disputing that, is a child who's really dysregulated, not a child who's intending to do harm. But when we kind of use language and words the way that we do, they're really meaningful, and words can make it easier for people not only to not think about inclusion, but to then go in a direction of exclusion. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that language piece, I think, is so critical.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy that you voiced over that, because it's true. It really does just start with a seed and can do a complete trickle down effect that impacts the culture, right? And likewise, the other direction too, if other people start hearing the positive ways that you're talking, it can impact in a positive way. But what I was going to say too is, even at the teacher student level, teaching students about how other students learn best. When Angie and I were co-teaching, we would always teach a lesson in the beginning of the school year that some students would need different accommodations than other students, right? And that's okay. We all need different things to learn best. And we are going to cultivate that environment for you. And it's okay to advocate for what you need, right? And ask for something else. So really embedding that in the classroom. And the other big thing is access, building relationship with parents and providing access to all parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that LiveWellEd streams to do, which we've noticed is a little bit of a gap in the school system, is providing knowledge and resources of what families have access to and can ask for within their rights, within a inclusive program.
Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of people were just chiming in with a few different thoughts related to all of this, and just Michelle gave a couple examples of the words we use. They didn't want to follow directions. How often do we see the assumption of intent, or the idea that somebody is choosing not to do something, instead of the fact that it's kind of that won't versus can't, right? We all have fluctuating capacity, and the fact that any of us can accomplish anything on a given day doesn't mean we can do it on all days. But there are assumptions that people make, and they really can be harmful. Most place, teachers using relational problem solving in turn teach students to do that as well. That's absolutely true. Well, we've got a lot of people chiming in here. Completely agree. Schools can become toxic environments. Creating healthy, positive environments needs to be foundation, not an add-on. And a couple other examples here. Michelle gave another one. Student didn't want to engage in a non-preferred activity. We often, and a lot of this, I know that you and I have had some conversations, and I know that you're kind of very much in kind of a trauma-informed mindset, and thinking about. And of course, our colleague Angie does a lot of work in the neuroscience realm as well, and that's something we talk about a lot. I think that we still have a lot of educators out there that don't have developmentally appropriate expectations sometimes of any child, but much less when you begin to add on individual differences, when you begin to add on neurodivergence or other things. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstandings about human behavior. The fact that we're still so heavily entrenched in kind of classical behaviorism. We did a whole conference recently called Beyond Behaviorism, really talking about how do we shift people's mindset and move beyond kind of like these carrot and stick approaches that not only aren't working, but quite frankly, they're often very harmful to a lot of our children that are, that have experienced trauma or that might be neurodivergent. So big shift there. You talk about relationships, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, relationships are really at the root of all of this. Um, and on the other side of the, on the other side of my mind, when I start talking about relationships and how critical they are, you can kind of hear well, I have, X number of students and I don't have time to build relationships with, every student. Tell me a little bit in your systems work that you've done, obviously as a special educator, and as a student, you saw the value and the need for those relationships, and we can take it now to the biological standpoint of like that safety that is felt in a relationship is critical to get to the cortex, right? If we want to help somebody learn, we're not going to do it if we don't get them to safety, and relationships are so critical. But tell me, kind of as a person who's doing work in trying to inform changes in systems, how do you bring some of these principles forward? I mean, again, it's really easy to say, well, relationships are important. And people go, yeah, well, of course they are. But, here's my workload. What have you done successfully to help people to see the importance of that?
I think starting in the beginning, before the school year even starts, is critical. And then as a school leader, having that be one of my top core values, really helping the educators that I oversaw by creating a routine around reaching out to families. So I proposed to my school teachers that we had a family engagement calendar. And part of the pre-work was understanding the needs of your kids before they come in, sending home parent communication about who they are as a teacher, how to best reach them, and then asking families for information on what's their best communication style. What are some of the goals that they have for their children going into this school year? And then again, as a school leader, following up with those teachers about how often are you reaching out to families? Where is parent feedback showing up in an IEP? If you're noticing a change in a child's behavior, have you asked the parent if there's anything going on at home yet? Have you asked them whether they've noticed these same things too, or strategies that they might try differently? But really thinking of the parent, I guess, honing in, thinking of the IEP team or the multidisciplinary team, that parent is a team member, right? They can provide so much insight, and then meeting those people where you're at as well too. So if the, caregiver prefers text message over emails, which oftentimes I'll hear, oh, the caregiver never responded to my email. Well, sometimes people don't always answer their emails, right? So really, trying to meet people where they're at and understanding where they're coming from. Those are some of the structures.
Yeah. I love, when I was asking that question, I was actually approaching it from a different direction, but I love the way that you approached it. And I was thinking about kind of encouraging them in terms of, building relationships with children and strategies to do that. But I think the relationship with families and caregivers is really critical. And one of the things that I think sometimes, I'm sure that I've seen, you've seen, we've probably all seen, we see some of these ideas coming forward in education where people begin to understand the impact of trauma, begin to understand, trauma-informed approaches, begin to think about how do we implement those things in ways to better support children. And sometimes people don't make that next leap to understand that they should take these same principles in working with families, right? Children that are coming in that may have a trauma history may be coming from families that have, have similar experience and have trauma. And it's easy to point to adults and think, well, and there's a lot of blame that sometimes happens, blame and shame that we see that happens. But I think applying these principles of because for many parents, I mean, and I'm sure you've run into this. I'd love to hear, how you've handled this. But if in their lives up until now, the only phone calls they ever got were because their child was not meeting an expectation, had a behavior that caused a concern or an issue. A parent initially answering a phone call or getting some correspondence, like there might actually be a little bit of parental trauma already, behind the scenes. So, I love that you started this question kind of talking about that family caregiver, connection, which I think is a really important connection to make. Have you, and just like kids, so, sometimes we have this thing that we say about, the kids that often need the connection the most, that we know what trauma can do in terms of affecting the ability to sustain and maintain relationships. The kids that sometimes need that connection the most sometimes have the most difficult time expressing it in a way that helps it to happen, right? And the same can be true with adults. Adults that have experienced a lot of trauma may not be open. So let me throw that at you as a question, which is, I'm sure that in doing this work and advocating for the things you've advocated for, you reach out for parents that have had perhaps not positive interactions before with schools. And how do you help to bridge that and build that trust and relationship? And that's what it is. It's a relationship. And how have you been able to do that?
That's a really great question, Guy. And there's been a number of instances, unfortunately, to your point, where that's had to have happened. And as an elementary school teacher and mainly as a middle school coordinator, so I'm getting families that have been in the school system for a number of years. Their kids are now 12, 14. Sometimes didn't even understand the IEP process fully, the rights of the family. My main step, and of course it depends individually on the family, but really listening, letting them know that I'm here for support and trying to understand where they're coming from. Most times in my experience, it's because the family has a lack of understanding or hasn't been included in the past. And that's why that, bringing back to that language piece, right? Or how people talk about people, like other educators will say, oh, something's going on with this family, this or that. It's really about meeting families where they are at and
Mhm.
listening to understand where they are. And once you've identified a piece that they want to work on, working with that family and following up with them, showing up, showing that you are not, that you say what you mean and mean what you say. So if you're going to follow up on this piece, you will follow up on this piece. Or if they are really interested in support in this way, helping them get that support in that way.
Mm.
But again, listening, using various resources, following up with those families, making sure that they're connected to the right people at the right time. And that's something that we also help provide through LiveWellEd too, is listening to those families, trying to find out where they need the most support, and then helping build families' capacities for having the language to speak at various IEP meetings so that they can feel confident. And then also letting them know what their rights are,
Yeah.
right, within that process.
I mean, we're talking about, IEPs, individual education plans. And of course, just thinking about IEPs probably gives some of our listeners knots in their stomach. The IEP process as a whole, unfortunately, is not a process that is always very pleasant or really truly supportive of the kind of collaboration that's important and needs to happen in working to develop a plan to support kids. It can be really difficult. And, I work with a lot of families who, I mean, they've been, kind of bullied in IEP team meetings. They've been led to believe things that weren't true. And of course, it's not pleasant necessarily for anybody. I mean, I would love to figure out how we could reinvent these meetings to really help them. And that's part of like the work that you're doing as well, is trying to equip a family to understand how to navigate the process. But even with all the things that are out there, it's not always an easy process to navigate. And, I mean, I'll tell you, as a parent and as somebody that has not only been alongside of people that have gone through this, but have gone through it myself, there is nothing more difficult than to be in a meeting surrounded by a table full of people and hearing people say lots of really negative things about your child and their low expectations around your child. So, I mean, it really is a process sometimes that is a tough one to navigate, but certainly an important one. And I think anything we can do to empower parents, and of course, you're doing the work that you're doing with LiveWellEd. One of the recommendations I often make for families that work with us are pointing them to the parent training centers, the PTCs that we have across the country. Every state has at least one parent training center. They can often, help as well in navigating some of these processes. But let's circle back for a second. I want to go back to kind of our topic in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. And, again, kind of knowing the landscape recently, and we've seen, quite frankly, I'd have to say, like, almost a weaponization, like somehow these things are bad things, and they're not. I think about diversity, and I think, well, of course we're diverse, and that has to be driving our thought process and what we do. If we want to better serve all humans, we need to understand our differences. And but tell me a little bit. Why do you think, kind of in a school setting? Why? Let's just start with diversity. Why? What's important about understanding, and how do we ensure that we not only understand but support a diversity of students and learners?
Well, I would say everything is important. And sorry, I'm distracted by a thought. I did want to just piggyback on our last conversation before we dive into this, that I 100% agree that the way to build relationships is also through highlighting the successes and the wins at school. This is, again, with the families, the student, and with the teachers. So making sure that where there, for every single challenge, there are at least 3 positive success stories that we're sharing. When you see that family at the end of the day, like, it is not always Johnny did X, Y, and Z. Like, we need to make sure that we are highlighting those successes. So,
No, I think that's a great point. And, we need to follow the same approaches that we advocate for, the way that we advocate for supporting children. We should be advocating for the same approaches when we're, in a school, when we're administration working with staff, when we're staff working with families. We often talk about at the Alliance kind of what I call the 5 principles. And I'm sure there could be more, but, we talk about kind of the importance of, trauma-informed, neuroscience aligned, neurodiversity affirming, relationship driven, collaborative approaches. Those are the same principles that we need to bring into working and supporting families, collaborating with, rather than doing to, understanding, their own situation and individual differences. So I think it's really important. So I'm glad you brought that point up.
Thanks. I will, and then go back to your last question about diversity and how it's important in schools. One of my favorite quotes is by Albert Einstein, which is, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." And to me, this really resonates when we think about our student population. Everybody learns differently, right? We need to be able to design our school programs and conditions for learning so that everybody can have access to that, whether it means, as someone brought up, staffing our classrooms appropriately, right? Training teachers on how to differentiate instructions based on different learning styles. All of these things have layers to it, but the emphasis is that students need to feel that they belong there because of the resources that we are investing and providing within the school setting to meet the needs of all of our diverse learners.
Yeah, and I think having even educators that look like you or might be wired like you or can relate to you in different ways. All of this is really important. Knowing more autistic educators that are out there, or other forms of neurodivergence that we see in terms of educators. Having people that understand and relate to you in different ways. But I think at its heart here, you summed it up really good in the beginning when you talked about your own experience kind of going through school and feeling like this was not well designed for me. We find this frequently. I mean, a lot of the reason that we have, kids that aren't able to meet the demands that are placed on them or having difficulties, we have systems that are not well designed for them. And of course, there's approaches out there. There are ways that we can, design learning environments. Think about things like universal design for learning and other things like that. Talk to me a little bit about kind of your experience in that. How do we, in the work that you're doing, how have you helped to bring about some of these changes of kind of creating learning environments that can better support a diversity of brains, a diversity of learners?
Totally. That's a great question. So specifically, I guess when I was a teacher, again, understanding the child, sometimes you'll have to try things that might not work, but the point is trying things, creating systems, and then systems for tracking those systems over a number of weeks to see whether those accommodations or differentiation style is working. You mentioned universal design for learning. I think that is so important. And one aspect of that would be also doing a needs assessment. So in the beginning, finding out the needs of a child or other students in your classroom. And from that needs assessment being designed to understand, okay, what is the bare minimum that this child needs? What is too much support or what is too little support? And then coming prepared to your class to be able to make the different modalities of how the child accesses the instruction and shows their learning, right? I think how a child shows their learning is also really important to consider, especially now that we have so many different tools, such as like speech to text within technology, things like that, for kids to show that they understanding the content, right, and they are able to access that, and then measuring student success from that.
How have you been successful? Well, I mean, one of the roadblocks here can just be, and you've already hit on this a couple of times and talking about mindset, but there's progress being made. Unfortunately, if I were to look across the country, there are probably fewer pockets of progress than I'd like to see, and you would probably agree with that. But in terms of kind of making some of these shifts and helping people to kind of change their mindset. I mean, a lot of what we so if we look at the work that we do here at the Alliance, a lot of the families and individuals that reach out to us are reaching out to us because they've had something happen. They've had a situation where, in some cases their child's been harmed through like restraint or seclusion. And, many of these things go back to a single failed approach, and that is a compliance-based approach. Often adults and educators are hell-bent on compliance, right? That's and I always say, like, compliance should not be the goal. Yes, we need kids to understand how to work with others and what boundaries might be, and there are things that are important, right? But sometimes you find the situation where the focus is really compliance for the compliance sake. And we also see situations where not kind of appreciating, not neurodiversity affirming, I guess is the best way that I can put it. The demands that are being put on, neurodivergent individuals are not appropriate. They're kind of one set of expectations. So, a lot of these approaches and systems are, how do we make an autistic child, for instance, seem less autistic? And that should never be our goal. Like, that is absolutely the wrong goal. But shifting mindsets around that can be difficult. And there's a lot of, and I can even relate to my own, journey, but, of finding things in my child's IEP at one point, like, I'm like, what? Why? So how do you get people thinking about how they can be more inclusive and more, diversity affirming and more supportive of all learners? What are some of the and obviously this is not there's no magic answer, right? Or it would be out there already. But what are some of the things that you
Yeah.
found successful in helping people shift their mindsets?
Yeah, and no, that's a great question. You're right. There is no magic answer, and there's often times where, you know, I've tried and tried, and I like to describe it as chipping away at the iceberg because I think it will always be a journey that we're on, and finding your allies is extremely important. Through my journey of chipping away the iceberg, what I've found is most successful in speaking to either other school leaders or outside stakeholders is finding what would be appealing to them most. So if it's a school leader, it's showing them certain data to start to shift their mindset around what is working or what isn't working. Another way is showing them case studies, right? Bringing them in, having them reflect on something. Also, and I'll say this too, not giving up, right? Sometimes you'll go to a meeting and the special education leader can be shut down, right?
Hmm.
Circling back up and trying a different avenue. So really not giving up in that way. But I would say oftentimes I'm most successful with sharing data that's particular to the situation, right? On showing that there needs to be change, coming with prepared strategies. So whether it's exclusionary practices of students or discipline data, students with over suspensions, what's going to be my solution if we want to keep the student in the classroom? And so then it becomes collaboration with the social worker at the school, the other providers at the school. What is the plan that we're going to be making and interventions that we're going to be doing? That will be our first line of defense,
Mm-hmm.
since the suspensions has been the previous first line of defense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
really doing the investment and background into that and then coming prepared in meetings.
Yeah.
I think articles and research can also be helpful, but in some cases I've gotten pushed back where, I don't have time to do this, right? So really I don't have time to read this, right? So making it as easy as possible for that other party that you need to get on board, and making that shift.
Yeah, yeah, and I would just add, and you can you can disagree with this point, but
Mhm.
I think that sometimes it's the best of the best educators that make the time. It's the people that are reading
100%.
books. I mean, we do book studies, and we have so many educators that join our book studies, and they're doing it on their own time. And the
Oh, yeah.
people that begin putting their own time into this, and even though they have very busy schedules, are often the
Yeah.
ones that really can make a huge difference. But I get it. I mean, I get the load that educators have, and it's not gone down; it's gone up. But this is such an important piece to find time for,
Mhm.
and really ultimately I think can make a huge difference. Um,
Definitely.
there's a point you made, and then I want to move into a different direction here for a second. But
Okay.
you know, kind of about making the case for things that aren't working. And what's interesting to me is that um, as humans, we often double down on things that don't work, even when they're not working. In fact, I'll challenge the audience that's watching us live. Think about the things that you know about that aren't working, but we continue to put a lot of investment in, and there's a lot of that happens. We continue to put
Mhm.
money, time, resources into ideas that don't work, or in a point of desperation. um, you know I've followed many stories around the country where you know school district concerned about behaviors, and rather than going upstream and trying to be curious and figure out the why, and how to kind of approach things differently, they want to increase the punitive exclusionary discipline. They want to increase suspensions and expulsions, although there's a tremendous body of data out there that says, like, these things don't work, they're not effective. So that seems to be an ongoing challenge, is that there sometimes is that tendency to double down in the things that aren't working. And I think from a human standpoint, some of it probably comes from being overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, the same thing happens to us that happens to our children, which is, our thinking, logical, rational brain is somewhat compromised. And we might go down a road we've gone down before just because it doesn't require as much thought. It's just what we can do in that moment. But I think that's a huge challenge, is, really encouraging people to go in different directions. If something's not working, let's not continue to do it. A lot of, and you probably know how I feel about a lot of kind of reward and consequence driven programs, but they are very, very prevalent, and I can tell you that a lot of the families that we've worked with and supported, and my own experience as well, even though they were well intentioned, that those approaches were often leading to situations that escalated and became bigger situations because they weren't working, but they would continue to do these things. So I think that's an ongoing challenge. Have you had any luck in kind of getting people to move, showing people some of the data, getting them to move, in different directions throughout your career?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's first identifying some of the teachers that are open to coaching, right? And working with those teachers on coaching, and then meeting them where they're at. So you're continuously having those meetings, sharing the student data, reflecting upon ideas. And one thing too, I want to share that you made a good point of the educator wellness needs to be brought up more, right? Like, we need to think about how, teachers are doing as well during this time, especially in a post-pandemic world, right? And so how are our school models also designed to support them, right?
Yeah. Getting back to a dysregulated, teacher is not going to be able to help a dysregulated child. And when you begin to think about all the things that educators have on their plates these days, dysregulation is a product of stress and stressors and past experiences and trauma and all of these things. But there's a tremendous amount on the educators, stress, inputs. So I think that work's really critical. I know, Angie, your colleague's done a lot of work in that, educator wellness space as well, but you can't shortcut it, because an educator who is not, is having a difficult time is going to be far more likely to become dysregulated. And that dysregulated educator is going to be far more likely to then, kind of in trying to support a child, do things that aren't working, Yeah,
totally. And trying to think about the positives of your question that you had asked before, and also intertwined with that, we need to be helping them feel less dysregulated, helping teachers know that they're supported by school leadership. I think also can help shift that. Reflecting on times that I've been successful is connecting classroom teachers to the related service providers, having those systems, as we discussed, the systems first, having those structures in place, and that sacred time to plan together, to be thought partners together, and then for leadership to be showing up. Okay, this is the routine that we created. Now I'm going to your classroom, I'm observing, I'm providing you feedback. They feel important in that way, right? And then you see when they have success, and then you can celebrate that success with them. And to your point before, in our discussion earlier about celebrating the wins, I think that can really create that buy-in from teachers in using evidence-based strategies, because they feel the success. They see that their leadership sees the success. That story is being shared broader. So I would just say having strong observation coachings, following up with those teachers is really important.
I'm a and I know you are as well. I'm a big fan of Dr. Lori Disatel's work, and of course Angie is one of the faculty members on the Applied Educational Neuroscience team out of Butler University, and a lot of Lori's work kind of focuses on that kind of idea of educator first, right? It starts with us. It starts with a regulated adult nervous system, and it's not going to go well with a dysregulated adult nervous system. I always love that work, because I think that as you begin to learn how to apply these things to yourself and understanding your own behavior through the lens of the brain and the nervous system. Understanding your own behavior through the lens of stress responses, that instantly, in my mind, makes you more understanding of others that you're working with as well, children, in the case of schools, and I think can make all the difference in the world. I've seen some really interesting extensions of some of this work, because again, sometimes the focus is on the kids, and obviously there's a good reason for that. But if we don't start with educators, educators, just like kids, they need sometimes supports. Sometimes they need, they need supports. They need, things to help them. And, thinking about that, I think, is really critical. I remember a educator I work with who was out of Colorado. She had been a student of Lori's, and one of the strategies that Lori was talking about at one point was kind of like these amygdala reset areas, like when a kid was really dysregulated, some place that they were able to kind of reset. And sometimes that may be something sensory related. It could be a lot of different things. Could be strategies, could be having a co-regulator there to work with you. But this particular educator had actually set up kind of a similar thing for the educators, so educators who were feeling dysregulated throughout their day, there were things that they had set up to try to, support their state of regulation, which is so critical. I think that idea that this work really does begin. I think somebody else, Shelley, a lot of comments that were going on in the chat. I just want to mention here real quickly. I saw some specific situations in the chat as well, and unfortunately it's hard to follow everything when there's a lot that's going on, but always let you know if anybody that's watching, if you're ever going through a situation and you need some help or guidance, feel free to reach out. Courtney can put our contact information in the chat. Always happy to offer some help. And I saw some others that were involved offering guidance, like the contact the parent training centers, the disability law centers can be helpful as well. So anyway, just wanted to kind of mention that. But Shelley just mentioned educators need to be taught regulation methods to regulate themselves before interacting with students. And again, even more fundamental to that is, I did not grow up as a child learning about my brain and my nervous system. I did not learn that my behavior was often a stress response. As a result, what I learned was that my behavior was the result of bad choices that I made, which at times were not at all choices. They were, a dysregulated kid without the ability to do an expectation that the adults put on them. So we've got to be, give ourselves some grace here and realize that, you're Nicole, you're much younger than I am. And I would bet that you didn't grow up learning about your brain and your nervous system, how that relates to your behavior. You probably learned similar things and probably had consequences and, other ways of trying to shape that. But, we know better now. And it gets back to that kind of Maya Angelou quote, you do the best you can, or you know better, better, do better. We absolutely have an opportunity now to do that. I want to transition because we're getting to the bottom of the hour here. We talked a bit about diversity, equity. From a school standpoint, why is equity really critical? And before you dive into that, if there's anything you want to jump in on, because I know sometimes I throw a whole bunch out there right before I ask you another question. So feel free to jump in if there's other thoughts that you had as well.
Oh, I mean, not to get too worldly here, but I mean, why equity is important in education to me is that if we provide equitable education to all people, we will ultimately have a better world. Why is that? Well, because we will be able to all of the unique, diverse perspectives of our young people, adult learners will now have the tools and knowledge to be able to share and contribute to our society. So by providing all people access to equitable education, we will all within our school systems learn more from one another, but then ultimately those people will all be able to contribute to a better, more peaceful world where we can communicate, collaborate, and just coexist together. So to me, equity is so invaluable in education.
Yeah, and I like your high level look at that, and I agree with you. I mean, I think a lot of this work, when you have a different understanding, when you can look through a different lens, it really can lead to making the world a better place. I mean, I think about, kind of, again, that idea of understanding human behavior differently, so that we can move past a world that our efforts are all around manipulating people's behavior. We can make the
Yeah.
world a better place. So, I mean, I agree with you. And I do think that when individuals have what they need to be successful, not what, here's the one size fits all, here's what everybody gets,
Exactly.
we're really able to ultimately, I think, create, not only stronger individuals and families, but, communities. Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about inclusion. And, we talked about this a little bit at the top of the hour. I think let me just leave it a question there. Talk to me a little bit about inclusion and your work around, because you work kind of, as an inclusion specialist as well, and kind of also the work that you're doing in leading teams. Talk to me about your work as it relates to inclusion and why it's really important in our schools.
Definitely. Well, I want to be careful how much I'm speaking as representing LiveWellEd here today, but I'll share a lot of my experiences with inclusion previously. And we know right now that there's a lot of research about how all students in the classroom benefit when there is inclusion of students, right? And I think it's important to start shifting the mindset of educators, which we've seen can have oh, these are my students or these are your students, right? So equipping teachers and inviting teachers to all trainings. So all teachers are invited to the math curriculum training, not just the general education teachers, right? So including all educators in these trainings, making sure that special educators are invited for coaching cycles and they are also being coached. And then third is really scheduling co-planning time so that the staff members can be prepared to teach in an inclusive environment, right? So people now are spending time investing in building lesson plans that are thinking of what the misconceptions of all of their learners are. What accommodations do I need to put in to my lesson beforehand? If I know that, Susie needs to sit closer to the classroom board for this lesson, making sure that they're arranging the class, putting in the work ahead of time. And so those are some of the main things to invest in when thinking of inclusion.
Yeah, I actually have a lot of concern, and there's a question here we can get to in a moment as well.
Yeah.
But I have a lot of concern with challenges around inclusion, and there are people that have ideas around that are very counter to inclusion, that think that a child with a disability, a child that has different needs, a child that needs different support doesn't deserve to be in a classroom with my child, the wisest child, and unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in some of these ideas around segregation, and I worry that without people getting involved and really standing up, that we could move in a very wrong direction around some of this. We've made a lot of progress, still very imperfect progress, meaning that, I think about, the ideas around inclusion when it comes to, students with disabilities, and, the things that I see sometimes that are done that, like, oh, well, we're going to, their inclusion is going to be having them in the lunchroom with all the students, or in the, and those things make me, insane. Like, we're going to put them in the most challenging, sensory environment, and we're going to call that inclusion. It's not really thoughtful inclusion, and it's not meaningful. But I do have a lot of worries, and somebody else had kind of mentioned this kind of as a Let me see if I can find it here, kind of as a statement / question, but kind of talking about some of the things that are happening on the federal level, and how the Department of Education and there've been a lot of efforts around some of this work, and of course when funding's being pulled for programs that are there to support diversity, equity, inclusion, all of these things, which I think the two of us agree are really critical to supporting learning environments that are equitable, that are going to help all children. I think there's a real reason to have some concern, and I guess the question becomes, how do we continue to encourage these ideas that are so critical to this, given some of the things that are happening out there right now?
Yeah, no, and I think there is real concern here, and I'm definitely keeping a close eye. With so much uncertainty, it's hard to know what's coming next.
Right.
Especially when the news is really displaying only the most negative things. There are some stories of how schools are, updating their mission statements to comply with laws, but while still working with communities to create, like, instead of inclusive classrooms, they're calling it like a belonging classroom or a belonging school system, and making sure that the funding for the people staff that are in the levels that are responsible for really creating the systems and structures are still being paid. So I'm holding out some hope, unfortunately, but it is a huge concern, and like how we navigate that. I think, Guy, what you're doing by like continuing to push forward with your podcast and showing up to conferences and outreaches and keeping our alliances strong within our group and still continuing to share the message is going to be critical during this time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think the other thing that is important in my mind is the power of the individual educator. Educators that believe and know that there are better ways forward have a tremendous difference. At the end of the day, there's a lot that can happen at a federal level. There's a lot that can happen at the state level. But what makes the most difference for my child and your child and other people's children is that individual at the front of the classroom. And I think anything we can do to continue, and this is an important time, continue to support our educators who themselves are under a tremendous amount of pressure and in very difficult situations. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. I mean, even, showing up at that board meeting, as a board moves to shift something, in whether it's a policy language or responding to something like you mentioned, being at that board meeting, being an active voice, I mean, that can make a difference. And supporting our educators. I mean, again, we've got some imperfect systems, but at the individual level, I mean, I'm still such a big believer that, that one educator can make such a big difference for a kid. And what we see kind of on the kind of high level here, I can tell you from individual situations that I've worked with where, a kid is not doing well in environment A, moves into environment B, and the biggest difference is the person that's standing in the front of the classroom, suddenly it's an entirely different child. The child didn't really change. It was kind of the leadership was being taken. So I think all that we can do to continue to encourage and support our educators in directions that are, aligned with, trauma-informed practice, neuroscience aligned practices, these things that are going to, move things in a better direction, I think is really critical.
Yeah, definitely. And really, continuing to get the message out there. I've also heard of success from either parents or groups like LiveWellEd going to schools and just providing a little bit more insight and understanding, because sometimes it's that community and like that the parents of the kids that go to that school sharing information about what's going on there, so then more parents can, to your point, show up to the board or advocate for what's going on, and really like reach those educators. And
and I think so many so many educators became educators because they wanted to make a difference, and they do, and the world can be overwhelming at times for all of them, I'm sure. But I imagine that, kind of in your own journey, you can think about some of the kids that you work with that you were able to make a difference for, and it's easy at times, to be overwhelmed by the big picture. But looking at the child in front of you, looking at the classroom in front of you, knowing the impact that you can have as an individual, I think is incredibly powerful. Which, is one of the reasons that I think it's really exciting to me. We have a lot of educators that are part of our community, and it's always really exciting to me to have educators that are, really, to say above and beyond would be an understatement, but people that are reading books, that are going to conferences, that are doing all they can to learn, that are collaborating with others. And I think it's an important journey for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, it makes me think of some people that are really taking ownership of the work and never stop their learning and their journey. And if
Right.
you are interested in any additional guests, I definitely have a few of those educators that come to mind, that are really passionate about this topic and about helping neurodivergent students have access in the classroom through different means. And they've had a lot of successes.
Well, the answer to that is yes. And that's part of what we try to do is we try to share, the stories and the experiences of educators, of self-advocates, of families, of others, because I think we can learn from, these experiences. So, yeah, you have other educators, and we can even do a panel or something fun like that. I
Yeah.
think anytime we can share good ideas, we're going to be, again, it's easy to look up at the big picture and go, oh, this is really overwhelming. Where's all this going to go? But, focus on the changes that we can make in front of us, and we're to continue things moving in a better direction. So yeah, we'll have to follow up on that and schedule something else, to get more of that out there. So we've kind of reaching the end of our time here, and just want to give you an opportunity to kind of tie everything together and reflect if you have any other reflection. But again, kind of our topic today, we wanted to, because it's important. Okay, diversity is who we are. We are diverse humans, and with different needs and different abilities and different strengths. And that is something that not only is a fact, but it's something that should drive us and making a better world, as you said earlier. The value of equity and the need for inclusion are so critical. So, our framework around this conversation was to say, hey, these things are still really important, despite the fact that you might say, oh, DEI, and somehow that's become a bad word. It's not. These are critical principles that really are related to working with and supporting all human beings. These are things that should be driving us. And at any rate, any final thoughts on kind of this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's important in schools?
Totally. Yeah, I just want the people listening to know too that there's co-conspirators in this work that's still finding that this work is important, even if the specific, the words are now shifting because of the political climate. There are people out there that are still driving the work, that think that the work and know that the work is critical. Feeling this sense of inclusivity and belonging is a fundamental right to our students. And I think it's really important to get the message out there about how, Guy had explained, if student A isn't doing well in one environment, how can we cultivate a different environment for that same student to really feel successful? And how can we build systems within our schools to shift the mindsets to become more inclusive environments through our different family engagement structures, our relationship building structures, the way that we approach our planning time with our teachers, and really coming from a mindset of assuming best intentions from the students, the caregivers, investing in educator wellness so that everyone is showing up their best selves. These are all really important. And I guess my last plug will be for LiveWellEd. And so if you are an educator that is experiencing burnout or want to learn how you could have a more inclusive mindset, or there's a child that you are not feeling that you are meeting, but you want support meeting, we are here to help no matter what state that you are in, or region that you're in. We work with all regions. And then on the other side, if you are a parent that needs support with either understanding the special education process at all, or navigating the next IEP meeting, please reach out. Our goal is to really help build that bridge and relieve you of some burnout by taking on the work for you, whether it's crafting the next email that goes to your child's school or just being a thought partner. We're really here for you. This is important work. And Guy, again, I got to say, kudos to you, to everything that you are doing, and really spreading the message and getting this out here. It's super important work. And thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate you joining me and, kind of, thinking about what you were saying. And I appreciate you kind of mentioning the work that you're doing, because, I mean, how advantageous can it be to have somebody that has kind of worked at higher levels in special education, offering you some input on language that you can use to get the things that you need to support your child. You and I had a chance to talk, I guess, in Atlanta about that and how valuable that can be. The other thing I was thinking about as you were kind of wrapping up your thoughts was just, the words of John Lewis, right? Despite all that's going on in the world, we need to continue to make good trouble, necessary trouble, at whatever level you're able to. And when I say trouble, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about, pushing for change. I'm talking about not accepting things as they are if we need to move them in different directions. So I encourage people to continue to think about how you can get involved at whatever level it might be to, affect change at your child's school, at a school that you work at, whatever it may be. And again, Nicole, just want to thank you. This is not your first appearance and won't be your last. We'll have you back on again, but I appreciate you sharing the time with me and sharing your perspective.
Of course. Thanks, Guy. And
so I'm going to
go ahead.
Yeah, we'll say goodbye to everybody here. I'm going to ask you, if you would, to stick around for a second, because we're going to say goodbye and it'll wrap up the podcast. But I just want to thank you one final time. So everyone that joined us today, thank you. And if you're watching this after the fact, thank you as well. And I want to encourage people. We've done, I don't even know how many. I was counting the episodes the other day. We've done a lot of these, and part of the reason we do them is that we're hoping that they're helpful, and we encourage you to share them with others. If you're an educator, share them with other educators you're working with. If you're a parent or a caregiver or self-advocate, share them. This is the way that we get change. So thank you all, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.